Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the revelations, the realizations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Throughout the season of Advent, we talked about regifting. So we're not Catholic, but I thought it would be good for some confession. So who regifted a gift this Christmas? Anyone? Yes, good, I like it. Who is pretty darn sure that you received a regift this Christmas? A few of those as well. So then the question is, did it feel different? Because we've been talking about it for a month, about how regifting is not necessarily a bad thing. If you gave a regift, did you still feel that anticipation when someone opened a gift that, I think they just might like this, that joy within it? Or could you find a way to appreciate the regift even as you received it? At my daughter's school, they have a holiday shop, and so all the kids get to go into this little room and can pick out something for their family members. And so both of my daughters separately went in and bought me the same necklace. And so once they realized that, they gave one to their cousins to give to their mom. And so on Christmas morning, and the other mom, my sister-in-law, knew she had received some gift that had been re-gifted in some strange way from my daughters. But we were able to open them together on Christmas morning, and it was a lovely necklace that said Mom with a heart. And it was actually a very special moment as we received those together. Re-gift and all. But this year we try to do something a little different with our kids as we think about the story that Mickey read for us about the three Magi bringing gifts to the Christ child. And so we gave each of our children 3 gifts. They received their 3 gifts from us and to remember the gifts of the Magi. But even when we try to do something so intentional, I think just about everything we do, when we try to remember the gifts of the Magi, the gift giving, connecting this story to what we do on Christmas morning, is wrong. We get almost all of it wrong. I mean, we get the whole picture. First of all, the Magi didn't come to the manger to give the newborn Jesus gifts. We celebrate their arrival today on Epiphany, which is the 12th day of Christmas. So while my husband is telling me we are not allowed to listen to Christmas music anymore, I adamantly told him it is still Christmas. Today is the 12th day of Christmas. And that's because we talk about this journey, that it took the Magi all of this time and extra time. Jesus was a toddler by the time they arrived to offer these gifts after they had followed that star. They had a significant journey, and that's a big part of what Epiphany is, to remember their journey across boundaries and borders, understanding the light of Christ that extends beyond what is expected or what is accepted, because they had to step boldly in following that star and travel not a short little time, but on this long journey to reach the Christ child. But then, of course, there's that issue of gifts. Now, I recently had a toddler, and whenever someone would give her a gift, I would do a little assessment of if this gift was acceptable, not in a judgmental way, but safe for her. I would look at clothes she would be given if they were too big or too small. If a toy said it's for children who are 7 and up and she was 1, maybe this isn't the right time. How many choking hazards are there in this toy that someone has nicely given her? So let me just say for any mom that gold, frankincense, and myrrh are not great toddler gifts. I did, however, stumble upon a sermon, and the pastor was quoting St. Bernard, who had said, in a very poetic way, "For they offered to Mary, the mother of the child, gold to relieve her poverty, incense against the stench of the stable, myrrh for to comfort the tender members of the child." To which the preacher said, in other words, they gave her money, Febreze, and lotion. So those are reasonably practical gifts. But that's not the traditional understanding of the gifts of the Magi, and as I just said, they were not even in the stable. But the most common understanding of these gifts dates back to a theologian named Origen in the 3rd century, who wrote and understood these gifts to be symbolic gifts, representing who Jesus was and the life that Jesus was called to. Gold was given as a symbol of kingship on earth. It represents the grounding, the humanity, and yet still the power of this child, not in another world, but rooted deeply in this world. This humanity is then balanced by the frankincense, which is incense. It moves up and out and was a symbol of divinity, drawing attention to the connection between this child and the Creator. And finally, myrrh was used as an embalming oil and was therefore a symbol of death. foretelling through a Christian lens the death of Jesus that would come some 30 years later. So when we think about these symbolic gifts that were given, it's almost unbelievable that these highly symbolic gifts have somehow moved into the tradition that we practice of gift exchanges on Christmas morning. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think we have missed the point. But to be honest, I can't imagine my children's faces if I started giving them symbolic gifts instead of toys on Christmas. But that's why today is so important. It's maybe more appropriate for today, on this day of Epiphany that is removed from Christmas morning, but still connected. It's also for us the start of a new year, a time to think about the year that is to come. Now for me this year, I really didn't feel really called to make any resolutions. The consent series that we as a church participated in the fall convicted me on a few things that I had already been making some lifestyle changes. And so I wanted to continue that instead of starting something new. And then on New Year's Day, my friend Laura began making, basically Facebook preaching to me. It wasn't to me specifically, but it felt like it was. A series of posts. It's like she did it every 2 hours. And I tend to not think of social media as all that good for the world, but these posts had beauty and wisdom in them, and they were in and of themselves a gift that I received, removed from Christmas. It was actually a re-gift because none of these words were her own. The first one said, "No resolution that, if kept, will make you more worthy of love. You, as your actual self, not as some made-up ideal self, you are already worthy," which I found beautiful and comforting and challenging. Because we do these resolutions because they're supposed to make us better, to push us beyond what is our own status quo. And so I don't want to argue against change or transformation. This past summer, one of our food truck nights, we had a community table and I made these popsicle conversation sticks. You've probably seen them because I keep re-gifting them to you again and again and again and bringing them out at different times. But one of the questions said, are we morally obligated to improve upon ourselves, to change so that we become better and better people? And for most, the answer was yes. But I don't actually think that is mutually exclusive with this idea that this post said that we are already worthy. The self we are is worthy, not the thinner self. We won't be only worthy when we have the thinner self or the fatter wallet self. This self is good and loved and whole. And then about 2 hours later, Laura posted again a quote from Desmond Tutu that said, "God's dream is that you and I and all of us will realize that we are family, that we are made for togetherness, for goodness, for compassion." Another re-gift that she offered that spoke of not doing something new, not becoming something other than who and what we are, but instead realizing. Now, realizing is actually at the core of our faith. The last book of the Bible, Revelation, is a book of symbols, which is why it's so odd and even terrifying to read if you don't understand the meaning of those symbols. But the word revelation means to reveal or to unveil. It is not something new, but realizing what already is, what has always been. That is what Bishop Tutu's quote says as well. His prayer is that we would realize that we are made for togetherness, goodness, and compassion. Not that we will become better people. Not that we will start to get along across all the lines that divide us. That sure should happen. But first we must realize something that is true. Something that already exists. That we are not ultimately divided from all of those people we cast as other. That we must realize and understand that we are connected. Ultimately, the gifts that the Magi brought the Christ child were not new either. Each gift in the traditional interpretation were symbols of what already was. Jesus' humanity and divinity and the path that he would walk, which would lead to a tragic death, that was already true. And maybe that's why they called them the wise ones. Because that's what wisdom is, isn't it? Not predicting an unknown future, but seeing the world as it is, understanding nuance, seeking not shallow answers that placate, but depth that dwells in questions and mystery. And then Laura posted again. This one had no mention of God, and yet it was only about God. It was written in response to all of those people whose New Year's resolutions or, in general, spiritual quests are spurred by the desire to, quote, find themselves. This one said, finding yourself is not how it really works. You aren't a $10 bill in last winter's coat pocket. You are not lost. Your true self is right there, buried under cultural conditions, buried under other people's opinions, buried under inaccurate conclusions you drew as a kid that became your beliefs of who you actually are. Finding yourself is actually returning to yourself, an unlearning, an excavation, a remembering who you were before the world got its hands on you. It's a quote by Emily McDowell. In other words, this quote is saying, it's a revealing, a realizing of who you are, who God created you as, and who God created you to be. Every year at Christmas, we spend so much time trying to think of the right present to give those we love in honor of the visit of the wise ones. But today, on Epiphany, maybe what we need is our own epiphany. Not something new and something shiny that could be wrapped and put under a tree, but the most wonderful re-gift that we could ever dream of. The gift of ourselves, our best selves, the self that God gave us and calls us to be. Now that might not be the most organized of the self, or the self that flosses twice a day, or the self whose finances are all in order, or the self who would win Parent of the Year, but the self that God knows us presently to be. What gifts did God give you at your birth? Not in 2018, but in the moments of your birth. If those wise ones would have shown up at your birth or a few years later when you were a toddler, to give you gifts that were symbols of who you are and how God knows you and sees you and how you were called to live and be in this world, what would those gifts have been? If you can answer that, congratulations. I would love for you to preach next Sunday. Because I can't answer that for myself, but I've been sitting with this question, and I think it's a question I want us to continue to sit with maybe all year long. I mean, Desmond Tutu's words about us being created for togetherness, goodness, and compassion, I believe for that to be true for all of us, but within that and beyond that, there is more. Our winter seasonal group, who came up with the theme re-gifting, which emerged in talking, we decided how do we take this through the rest of the winter season, and they wanted to move it into a new direction. And so for the next 7 weeks, we will be talking about the gifts of the Spirit. This is actually a Catholic doctrine, which felt a little odd to me as we started talking about it until someone said, Selena, you talk about Buddhism all the time. I think you could talk about Catholicism. Truth be told. The 7 gifts that we will be exploring throughout the next few months, month and a half, are wisdom, the gift of understanding, the gift of knowledge, the gift of courage, the gift of reverence, the gift of wonder, and the gift of right judgment. I reached out to a good Catholic friend of mine who explained to me that in confirmation you learn that these gifts are given by the same Spirit that we know, the same Spirit that we talk about, and our Catholic brothers and sisters understand these gifts to be given to each one at birth. But when you look around at the world, it's clear that we're not all fully living in to all of these gifts that God gave us at birth. But the Catholic Church understands it is the work of the church, the sacred rituals, learning, practicing, that develops these gifts, helps them to be revealed, helps them to be realized. Which seems to be the answer to my earlier question. If we choose not to resolve to do anything different this year, how does the world change? But it seems the answer might be that we work to be not someone or something else, but we work to be exactly who God made us to be. That is the gift God gives each of us. And so now in Epiphany, it's our turn to re-gift those gifts to ourselves. As the quote said, to unlearn that which is untrue, to excavate our life, our stories, and our assumptions, to dig down into the depth of where God dwells within us, to return to ourselves, and to remember each of our gifts and the ways God is manifest when we know them and when we use them. And when we do that, when we re-gift ourselves the gifts of God, we too then will be wise ones.